Okay, so I'm going to invite in Sadie to take the stand. Okay, so we're just trying to work out how to get her in. But in the meantime, I'm just going to introduce Sadie a bit. So I'm sure she'll do a much better job than me. But Sadie came from a drama teacher background. And today we'll be talking kind of like how they went through their journey into getting into the games industry and how you can transfer jobs once you start out. I feel like there's a lot of pressure on people to try and get into the games industry straight away when, you know, that's not always a viable option. I believe I've just invited Sadie. Hello?
It worked!
Yay! Okay, good.
Hello.
So, Sadie, if you would like to introduce yourself and kind of, let's get started.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So my name's Sadie Jarvis. I usually go by just Jarvis, though. All my friends know me as just Jarvis. And I am currently the marketing and community director for Gerdoo Games, and we're an indie studio based out of Seattle. Although, as you can probably tell from my accent, I am in the UK. So I work remotely, which actually a lot of people are doing now, post-pandemic, which is amazing, and I'll get to that point later on in the talk as well. But as Adele said, I have had quite a journey in my career. It has been quite the ride, and I thought that it would be valuable to people who are looking to get into the industry now, who may be coming from a different background, maybe not what I refer to myself as not being a spring chicken anymore. Think that maybe it's a bit hard to get in without having that traditional university and then going straight into it route. So I wanted to share my story to show that it is absolutely possible, and kind of give you a few tips on how you might be able to go about doing that yourself. But I also think it's valuable for people who are at university and want to go in to the industry straight away, because there are some tips in here about how to do a specific games CV, what recruiters and employers are looking for, and how to tailor it. And I've got an example of my own CV, which we'll go through later on as well. So I have got a list of notes, but trust me, to do a talk in the middle of a heat wave, my brain is frazzled, and I'm also dyslexic. So reading my notes, if I stumble, please forgive me. Because I might do, and I will check the chat every now and then. But I'm gonna predominantly do the talk, and then afterwards, I've left space to take questions. Then, otherwise, dyslexia being, I will lose my place. So we'll wait to the end. So my journey, let's see how it began. So my aunt was the head of a school in Ipswich, and she was my idol when I was a little girl, and I grew up wanting to be a teacher just like her. Theatre and performance have always been a huge part of my life. Right from the age of 5, actually. That was when I did my first stage show. And so because of this, I decided to pursue a career in teaching drama. I hit a few bumps in the road along the way due to having pancreatitis and a related disability that formed as a result. And funnily enough, I actually ended up going to university in the first place to study interactive media production at Bournemouth. This was a year or two after I first got sick at the age of 17. And at that time, I had to stop a full-time performing arts course and take A-levels instead. I was sure I wasn't going to be able to study drama at university because of my physical limitations, and had pivoted to want to work on games instead. I loved Bournemouth Uni and had begun working on my first student game when I ended up in hospital for a 2-month stint, thanks to my dodgy pancreas. And that's a point that I didn't actually say at the beginning, but this talk is really useful if you are disabled and you want to get into the industry, because I know that there are a lot of things that get in the way when we are looking for jobs as disabled people. But there's some hope in the game industry, and I'll tell you why when we get to that point. But back to university me, I was now facing a choice. After a 2-month stint in hospital, I could either start the first year again, or stop completely and start somewhere else and do something else. Because of my stint in hospital, I was actually feeling physically a little bit better. And so I decided to go ahead and follow my original dream and find a drama course that I could do. So I did some research. I found a course that was applied drama and creative writing and was a joint honours. So it gave me a chance to do a bit of both. And I then went on to do that. I really enjoyed it. The course was super interesting. It was at the University of South Wales. And I'm really glad that I chose to do a joint honours because that served me really well later in life, especially when I was teaching, because teachers quite often have to teach more than one subject. So it was really useful. And it's useful now as well. And again, I'll tell you why when we get to that point. Now, I'm one of those people who doesn't give themselves a break. I can be pretty hard on myself. But that being said, the year after I finished my drama degree, I got a teaching job as an unqualified teacher. I didn't even know those existed, but they do. And I managed to get a job at my old secondary school. And although I can be quite unkind to myself, I found that I was actually a kick-ass teacher, if you excuse the expression there. And this was before I'd even qualified. So when the year is up, I decided to go straight back to university to get my PGCE, which is our UK qualification for teaching. And then I got my first drama teaching job in a super fancy private school near Bristol. Within 2 years, I qualified as a teacher with study. Excuse me, that is the dyslexia there. Within 2 years, as a qualified teacher, I had secured the role of head of drama at a secondary school near to where I grew up. And I thought I was set for life. I was so sure that my fiancé and I would settle down there, raise a family, and that I would run that drama department and get to direct school plays and help kids get into acting for the rest of my career. And I probably would have too, had the school not neglected to get the adaptions I needed as a disabled person to be able to do that job for an entire year and a half. As a result of their neglect, I ended up going from a person who used one crutch to get around to using two to being in an electronic wheelchair. At that point, I was no longer able to give the kids my best, and I'm not the sort of person who can do anything by half, especially in my career. And so I made the heartbreaking decision to retire from teaching at 28 years old. That's normally when a lot of people start their careers, after having years off university and exploring and being a 20-year-old. I didn't get to do any of that. I was retired at 28 and panicking quite a lot. It was devastating to me. And although I'm laughing now, that's because I know where I am at this stage in my life. But then, at the time, I felt that teaching was the thing that I was meant to do and that losing it was the end of the world. So it was hard. It was a dark place. And I turned to games for escapism. And it might sound dramatic, but gaming and gaming communities literally saved me from the darkness. The ability to lose myself in another world and then to connect with others about that world gave me new life and reignited the flame I once had at Bournemouth. Gaming had always been such a huge part of my life. It was what connected my fiancé and I, how I met a fantastic group of friends, and had been a literal lifeline to me so many times since I'd got ill at 17. When things had gotten tough, games came through for me. Because of this, I decided to try for a new career in the games industry. But I was now 28 and no longer a bright-eyed uni student with a clear path ahead. So I had to tackle starting a new career with a lack of either a related degree or experience in the industry. And most of you will know That's pretty scary. It was terrifying, I'm not gonna lie. But I knew that there was something that I had to be good at in the games industry. And so I set to work researching all the different roles out there. I think that this is one area that a lot of people who haven't studied on a games degree aren't always aware of. A lot of people assume that if they can't code or draw, that they can't work in games, which, as you probably know, is so far from the truth. There are roles available in so many different areas of expertise that pretty much anyone with a passion and a drive to make great games could find something they'd be good at. My original idea was to get into narrative design, or writing for games, thinking that the creative writing part of my degree would be enough to help me get an entry-level position. Boy, was I wrong. I applied for so many writing positions and didn't hear back from most of them. The ones that did respond told me I needed more experience. And it was then that I first came upon the needs more experience, but nowhere will hire me to get said experience conundrum. I'm sure many of you know that feeling very well. I'd never even heard of a game jam at that point, and I'd never needed a portfolio of any kind in a teaching career, and I thought they were just for artists, if I'm honest. So it's safe to say that I felt like I was hitting my head against a brick wall with all my applications. But then, out of nowhere, I was contacted by somebody who on paper looked super impressive. They had worked for several big name studios and publishers and had credits on some true classics. They told me they were starting a studio and were looking to make it a place where disabled devs in particular could get their start, and hired me as a trainee game designer. Once I began working for their studio, I absolutely loved the job immediately. But I started to hear rumblings online about my new boss's history. Rumours that they were a con artist and that they made up most of their work history were spreading, and I decided to bury my head in the sand. I was being paid and we were working on a game. And I was being trained by other people, not just this person who was having his name smeared. So surely this was legit, right? I couldn't be having to admit that my new career had gotten off to a rocky start, could I? Yeah, I could. Within 2 months, the boss told me they were having to shut down production, and it all hit me that I had been taken for a ride. And I sort of buried my head in the sand again. There was a lot more to the story, but the reason I've included it at all is to impress upon you that if something seems too good to be true, it usually is. Of course, I wasn't going to be able to go straight into the industry without any experience at all showing on my CV. I didn't let it discourage me though, because having previously helped my students find the right career path at the end of their schooling, I learned that everyone is truly excellent at something. It's not just a cheesy expression. I was a great teacher. What made me a great teacher? That's what I had to figure out. So I sat down and took a long, hard look at myself, which is something I find really uncomfortable. But eventually I got a list that I decided I was excellent at. Those things were public speaking, engaging people, performance, being a warm person that others are comfortable around, utilizing the latest technology, and behavior management. Those were my key skills. Those are the things that I needed to focus on in order to find a career in the industry, because I already had years of experience using those. I just had to find a role that required them and find a way to show how the skills transfer from teaching to the said role. And honestly, it didn't take me long to find and settle on community management. One of the reasons for this was that a woman already in the industry that I admire is Holly Bennett, who had initially started out as a midwife before using her experience moderating a game fan group as a springboard to get a job with Bandai Namco, and then PlayStation Access, one of my favourite YouTube channels and where I first discovered her. At that time, she was working for CD Projekt Red as head of UK communications. And as a giant Witcher nerd, seeing Holly in such an awesome place in her career, it really emboldened me to go for it with mine. A midwife uses many of the same skills that a good teacher does, and I knew if she could transition to community management from midwifery, then so could I. I realized that as a teacher, I developed all the skills you would need to manage a community and help it grow. Plus, I knew how to video edit from university, and I could create content no problem. Maybe this was a way I could build experience, only in a different role than I had imagined myself previously. Excuse me, take a sip of water in this heat. Stay hydrated, everybody. So, because every single role I saw advertised had a minimum requirement of at least 3 years experience as a community manager in the industry, I knew I would face rejection should I apply at the time. So I decided to take a year to build my CV to show employers how my skills would transfer, to make the most of my unemployment, as it were. With the amount of online communities centered around gaming, I knew that there had to be one that needed leadership. So I set out to find it. I wanted to find a community that I was passionate about so that I could give it my all authentically. And luckily for me, I didn't have to search long. I noticed that the fan account for PlayStation Access was dormant and had been for over a year. And if you don't know PlayStation Access, they are the UK's official PlayStation YouTube channel. And I had been watching them since they first started making videos. At the time, in 2019, Access had started ramping up their stream schedule, and the same people would show up to every single stream. I was one of them, and I noticed that we all started to become friends and were looking for ways to connect outside of the Access chat, so we wouldn't be limited to their stream times. There had been a Twitter account called PlayStation Access Fans, and it had been inactive for over a year, as I mentioned. So I contacted the owner of the account and asked if I could take it over. Luckily, having been an active member of the community myself, the owner recognised me and understood what I wanted to do, and handed it over. I then used this to begin to turn the PlayStation Access Fans into a blossoming community. It didn't take long before a friend and I started a Discord server for the group, which shortly after its launch became my sole responsibility. I used it to hold regular game nights, challenges, and competitions, finding new ways to engage and enthuse the community. We became the Access Army, and the team at PlayStation Access took note and began to use our server as a place to interact with their fans, getting them involved in videos and sometimes streams. Although Sony wanted to keep the community as an unofficial community, Access still often would shout out the server and recognise it, and it grew and grew. Then 2020 happened, and the community was suddenly online all the time, and I devised a way to give them something to do. Because of my background in performance arts, and having been a gamer all my life, I was pretty sure that I would take to live streaming. Access made it look so easy, and I knew that it was often part of a community manager's roles and responsibilities. I had previously created a YouTube channel for the fun of it, and already had a couple hundred subscribers there, so I decided to stream there instead of Twitch to start with. I taught myself how to use OBS, and dived in. I launched my After Party series that went live after every single Access stream, so that the chat could continue to hang out. Often I'd play the community's favourite party game so that they could take it in turns to be part of the stream too, and occasionally a member of Access would drop by the chat to see everybody. Eventually, it became clear that 2 or 3 streams a week would not be enough to keep everybody entertained, and so I devised Access Army TV. I put out a call to see if anyone would like to learn how to stream, and began teaching people how to use OBS, to give them advice on performance skills, and on which tech products were a good investment, etc. Then we had enough people streaming, so we made a program in a dedicated channel on the server that included a schedule of when everyone was streaming and where you could watch them. On top of this, I also started Gamers Unite, a channel which gave people a safe space to vent or to seek advice during those trying times in 2020 and 2021. Building a community during a pandemic was definitely a baptism of fire, but I'm so glad I was able to create a space for people to go to be with others during what became one of the loneliest times. That community meant everything to me, and I built it. I knew now more than ever that this was a career that I could see myself doing in the long run. And I did that purely through volunteering. I might have worked full-time hours to get the community to where it was, but it was all voluntary. But it was all now experience that I could put on my CV. At the start of 2020, whilst I was working on Access Fans, I also began looking to take any online courses or training lectures that I could. I wasn't in a financial position to be able to do Open University, but I knew that there were tons of online learning sites that offered free courses, such as places like Allison.com. Some that were even certified. So I began researching and seeking out reputable sites. I taught myself how to video edit on Adobe because I'd previously been using different software, and I knew that Adobe was a common software used in studios. I also taught myself camera skills. I taught myself lighting skills, sound mixing, so many different types of things that I otherwise would never have known how to do. And all of this is available in so many different areas and only goes to add to your CV. It wasn't long when I was doing this that I came across a community-based company. CMX specialize in community management. I saw that they were holding a 2-day event with panels and meet and greets, so I decided to join up. The panels included guest speakers such as Victoria Tran, the community director for Inner Sloth, the makers of Among Us. The event happened just after Among Us had taken off on Twitch, and Victoria had used her outstanding skills in community management to propel the games to new heights. Seeing her talk was truly inspirational to me. It made me even more determined to get the same job as her for real. During the meet and greets, I met a great bunch of community specialists, and one of which suggested that I join a Discord called Into Games. You might have heard of it. This was a real turning point for me, as I was able to learn so much from actual industry experts that I otherwise would have had no way to access. I went to so many of these talks and took pages and pages of notes in each one. One of the first and most important tips I gained from this server was to really take the time to jazz up my LinkedIn profile and use it to make connections in the industry. I got this from a talk, I believe, from Rare when they were doing a special day in the server. As I'm sure you're aware, networking is extremely important in this industry. Getting your name in front of the right eyes can open up opportunities you would have otherwise never found by yourself, and LinkedIn is a great way to do this. I did a lot of reading on what employers and recruiters were looking for, and then spent time tailoring mine to fit their expectations. Next, I threw caution to the wind, literally, and sent connection requests to everyone I admired in the industry. And I'm not joking, I really did. And actually, 9 out of 10 times they accepted. I was so shocked that people like Herman Holst, who at the time had just taken over the role of head of PlayStation Industries, would connect with someone like me, who had no experience yet and just passion. I have to say, I really geeked out about that one big time, and my friends will attest to that. I've been a fan of his work at Guerrilla for years. Anyway, I realised that as a platform, LinkedIn was super useful and began engaging with contents from devs all across the world, getting to know some pretty well too, and I've now got friends that I met through LinkedIn. I built my connection list into a who's who of games, and used it to keep up to date with everything going on in the industry, specifically with studios that I really wanted to work in. The next tip, and probably the equally most important one, was to revamp my CV to get interviews. I had attended a talk by another community specialist in this server who kindly offered to take a look at my CV after the talk. And she gave me some tips on how to improve it. I won't name her because she is way too nice and will say yes to everybody who wants a CV check and will overwhelm herself. But she's a prominent name in the community sector and someone I look up to. So I took her advice to heart, and I'm so glad I did, because after making the changes suggested, I started to get interviews. Now, I'm just going to check the live panel chat. I'm going to link in there my CV. If you want to open that whilst you're listening, if you can do, click on that. It's not my current CV, so it's not completely up to date, but it's an example. And I'm giving it to you as like a visual aid while I go through this next part, because it's kind of my advice that I've learned from this server, put into action, seen it work, and I want to give it to you so that you can do it to your CVs as well. So, she gave me the advice to stamp on my CV. That's STAMP on my CV. It made me laugh, so I'll always remember it. And STAMP stands for structure, tailoring, adding specifics, making it personal. That last one is a cheat because it's the M and the P, but it works, okay? So structure, tailoring, adding specifics, and making it personal. So, how do you do these things? Each of these aspects are really important if you want to stand out to recruiters. A traditional CV is usually laid out in rather a rigid structure. You have your details, your education history, your employment history, any other qualifications, and a small personal profile. On the best CVs, the employment history will also show the roles and responsibilities for each job you've held as well. But other than that, there's very little variation in format and structure. The games industry thrives because of creativity. Your future employers want to see you on your CV. Who are you? Will they like working with you? Do you have the knowledge needed for this role? Do you know the software they use? Or will you need teaching, etc.? So why not show them this in both a creative and a concise way? If you check my CV, as you can see, it starts with a personal profile. This gave me a chance to immediately show them that I'll fit in. My education, relevant job history, and I'll get to that in a second, references are small but clear to the side, with additional sections for volunteering and personal interest. And you'll notice that I have taken out the list of roles and responsibilities for each job in my employment history. Instead, now focusing the main section of my CV on demonstrating that I have the skills they are looking for, specifically for the role I'm applying for. Which leads me to the next point, tailoring. It sounds so obvious that you need to tailor your CV to the specific role you're applying for. But you would be surprised how many CVs recruiters have told me that they've seen sent in with blatantly copied and pasted studio names over the top of an existing studio name for the previous job that you applied for. You may think that because it's the same job title that you applied for elsewhere, that you don't need to change much, but that will hold you back from truly standing out from the crowd. You'll be surprised by the difference in duties any given role may have from studio to studio, especially if you're wanting to work in community management. So you need to really read the expected duties you will be required to do for a role. And then I suggest jotting down on paper something you have done that clearly demonstrates that you have the skills needed for each and every point on the job specification you are going for. You then smarten up the language and add your examples to your CV as evidence of your expertise, showing that you are more than capable of the tasks required. When doing this, you will need to include the next point, which is to add specifics. Give actual examples of things you have done. This gives you a chance to demonstrate any voluntary work you've done. So for me, it gave me the chance to write about what I did for PlayStation Access. Volunteering is technically not a job, so it doesn't go in the employment history section. So by making your CV specifically focused on the expertise required for a role, you can talk about stuff you have done outside of your traditional work history. And this is also why you need to be very specific with your work history. Make it relevant. I have worked in 3 schools, 2 colleges. I've worked in a call center. I've worked in the same call center again at a different time in my life. I did that dodgy games design job, and now I have 2 industry roles as well. I haven't got all of those on my CV because most of those are not relevant to the games jobs that I'm applying for in the head of the employer. Even if there are transferable skills from my previous history, I'm not going to put that in the employment history section, because when somebody quickly looks at just that section, they only want to see the industry experience you have that is relevant. You can talk about the other stuff in your personal profile or in the expertise if it's relevant. So the last point of personalizing it is where you can really make sure your CV grabs the attention of recruiters and employers. Now, I've shown you my CV and how it's structured to show you where to give it weight. I have not, however, given you the CV so you can go away and copy the style of mine, because doing so will not get you any favors. You need to make your CV personal. Make it stand out from the other 100 black and white, same structured CVs that they have in their pile. You need to find a design that speaks to your personality and skills. If you're an artist, this will be easier. But if you're not, look for other examples of creative CVs. There are so many on LinkedIn to have a look at. And find inspiration. You don't need to use as much color and design type skills that I have to make it stand out. And if you want help with it, I actually am more than willing to have a look over your CVs. And if you want to find me on LinkedIn, that's where I will be willing to accept looking at CVs. And I'll give you my LinkedIn link at the end of the talk. But I can't stress enough how important it is to put effort into your CV, because it really does make a difference. Mine piqued the interest of a new indie publisher the moment I listened to my friend's advice in the industry and made those changes. As soon as I did, I went from being rejected over and over and over again to getting interviews. And I got my first job in February of last year. I became the community director at Untold Tales, an indie publisher that had just begun their journey in the industry themselves. And so I joined right at the beginning, brand new myself, and was their only community person in the whole of the publishing studio. And so I had another baptism of fire. In a publishing house, I hadn't thought about the fact that you end up working on more than one game at a time. In fact, at a certain point during the career, in that job, I had 4 to 5 games on the go at any one time from different devs, and had to manage the communities for each of them. I soon discovered that this didn't suit me personally because of the type of person that I am. I'm the type of person that likes to give 100% to what I'm doing, and I felt like I wasn't able to do that for specific devs because I had to split my time. And so I knew quite quickly that I would want to work in a studio instead of a publishing house. And that's perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with publishing, but it just wasn't for me. And so immediately I began looking for studios that I would want to work in. And again, I decided to be specific. I knew from working in this job that I loved the indie sector. For me, that's where you see all the innovation in the games industry today. It's the most exciting part of the industry, and it's the only part of the industry I can see myself in any form of the future. So I knew that I wanted to work in an indie studio rather than an indie publishing house. And at that time, because I knew that I wanted to take a slightly different direction than the first job I managed to get, I also sat down and took a long, hard look at what role I wanted specifically. Now, because I was working in a very busy environment and was having to wear many, many, many hats, and let me tell you, you will do that in indie studios. You will very, very much be more than one specific thing because there's not enough people. So you need to do lots of different tasks. And I love that sort of thing. I learned so much in this role. My boss, Pavel Skaba, in Untold Tales, taught me so much about graphic design that I can't even begin to credit him enough on that. And I also learned all about how to report things on Jira, something I didn't even know existed before, which is what people use for QA testing. There's so many different things that I learned in that job that I can now use and had as another bunch of skills on CV. And so this time round, when I was looking for a job, I decided to really look at what I offered. What did I give to the industry? And what did I want to get in return for that? I knew that I didn't want to be a community manager again because now I had more bows in my string. I could do more things. So I wanted to find a role that included more responsibilities, that included slightly different pathways than what I had originally thought. And I rolled with it. And I found a job application for one company that I loved the game that they had put out. And then I found another job application for a company that I'd never heard of. Now, you would think that the one for the game that I knew really, really well and was really, really excited about as a company would be the one that I would put all my effort into. But it wasn't. I put equal effort into both of those jobs because you really do never know until you apply what that studio is going to be like, whether you're going to fit in with those people, whether you'll gel with them in an interview. So I went for both. And it's really important that when you are applying, even if you're applying for somewhere that you never heard of, you just know that it's a game studio and they're working on something now and they can't tell you about it yet because you're not part of the company and there are NDAs that have been signed and it's all quite hush hush, you still need to put the same amount of effort in because that job that I didn't know anything about is the job that I ended up taking, and it is the job I'm in now. And I have never been happier doing anything in all of my life than I am doing the job that I do right now. Gerdoo Games is a new studio. They've been around for about 2 years altogether. And they are making a social deduction game called Republic of Jungle. You'll notice my little rabbit icon as my profile picture. She's a character from Republic of Jungle. And the game is kind of like Among Us meets Jackbox. So it's the social deduction side, but you use your phones to join in and anybody can join in, and it's a community-based game. And being somebody that loves community and building community, working on a community-based game couldn't be a better match for me. This studio has also allowed me the opportunity to go out and do these sorts of things, talk to you guys today. Last weekend I was on panels for PAX. I never thought that would happen. In a few months' time, I'm going to be running events at EGX in London, an event that I've always wanted to go to as just a member of the public. And now, my first time going to it, I'm going to be hosting a show and having a booth. And I never thought I would be here just 2 years, not even 2 years, a year and a bit into my industry games industry career. But you can do it. If you have the passion and you are willing to take the time to sit down and really analyze what it is you are excellent at and find the job that fits that, you can do it. Doesn't matter what industry you came from. You will have skills that will match to something. And it's time to sit down and look and find out what that is. If you know what that is and you are ready to take the next step and you want help with using a CV, making it jazzy, you want help with LinkedIn, you want help with messaging people in the industry to ask questions, I love this sort of stuff. I am more than willing to help with those sorts of things. I'm going to be hiring people myself soon at some point, and so it's kind of gone full circle. I went from being a person who sat where you are now, listening to people talking about the industry, from the industry, admiring them, wanting to be them, only 1 year ago, to having my dream job in the industry. Now, it is important to always remember that you can do more. Someday, eventually, I would love to get into narrative design. And so now, even though I'm doing a job I absolutely love, on the side of it, as a hobby, I've started doing game jams now that I finally know what they are. And I'm doing narrative design for that. And I get to do lots of little stories as a hobby. But that hobby someday could build experience. And when I see a job for a studio that I absolutely love, that I'm right for in 5-10 years time, I'll have a wealth of experience that I've gained outside of my main job, the same way I did with PlayStation Access and the community management stuff there, ready to go, because you never know. And continual self-improvement is so important, especially in an industry that is always changing. Go to events, go to as many CPD courses as you can. Meet as many people in the industry as you can. You will learn something from everybody you talk to. Hold on to it, utilize it, and use it. And if you have any questions, I am here to answer them for the next 15 minutes. Hang on time. I'm proud of myself for that. Okay, let's have a look.
Ooh, that was awesome. So motivating, just like Katie said. My God.
Thank you.
I do actually have a question of my own that I'd love to ask.
Yeah.
I definitely relate to what you said about using games for escapism, and I was quite curious about which games you did play during that period.
Yeah, so for me, I like to get lost in story-based games. I am someone that really, really enjoys a good narrative. So at that time, I was playing Death Stranding. 192 hours in that game, just walking around, listening to music, vibing. And then God of War, and then I went on to Returnal, and those three really helped me during that time period. The stories were just so incredible that they transported me out of my own head.
I definitely relate to the whole narrative games and just spending hours in them, not making any progress, but at the same time exploring everything. It's so good.
Yeah, I loved it. It was something really, really moving for me, I think, because as well, something I didn't mention is that when I first started applying for jobs in the industry, I would find, this was before the pandemic, right? So I found that I couldn't even go to some interviews because they were in buildings that didn't have lifts, were upstairs, weren't wheelchair accessible, and they weren't willing to accommodate remote work. So I was shut out so often from getting a job in the industry just because of that. And then the pandemic happened and everyone realized, oh, people can be productive working from home. So all of a sudden, loads more roles opened up. And specifically in this industry, I think people have been very open to hybrid working or remote working. And it gave me a chance to get a foot in where otherwise I don't think I would have. And I think if I wasn't so passionate about games, had they not done so much for me, I might have given up at the beginning when I wasn't able to get in physically. So I'm glad I had that love for them that kept me going at it until there was a time that things changed.
Yeah, definitely. On the topic of disabilities as well, do you have any sort of like resources you would recommend to help those who are in a similar position to you when you were starting out? As it can seem quite like daunting, can't it? If you're being shut out.
Yeah, it can, absolutely. One thing that I think is really important that everybody who is disabled does when they're working in any industry is to really read up their country's laws on what is and isn't acceptable from companies for disabled people. Because, for example, I found out about 2-3 months before I got this job that because of my disability, all of those places that refused to interview me because I wouldn't be able to get into the building actually broke the law, because me wanting to work from home wasn't just a need, I just want to do it. It was a accessibility need, and them not like even considering it is actually against the law. And I didn't know that, and so I didn't stand up for myself at all. So I would say massively make sure that you look into this. In the UK, we've got Citizens Advice Bureau. You can go talk to them. I'm sure there's equivalents in other countries as well, but make sure you do that. And then also, there is nothing better than talking to people who are disabled who do work in the industry. There are some groups on Twitter that are quite good. They just are groups of people. There's Facebook groups that have disabled people that are working in the industry, and also just going on LinkedIn and looking for people's stories and reaching out, because most of us know how hard it is and are willing to talk to other people in the same situation and guide them, because there aren't that many resources out there, to be honest. It is very difficult for disabled people in any industry. There are a lot of things in gaming to help disabled gamers access games, but there aren't any that I have found things that will help disabled devs get into the industry. So it's something that I'm very passionate about and want to work towards getting some kind of thing going myself in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really, really good point, actually. There's one question that's come in about how you mentioned about your creative CV as opposed to a standard-looking one. Yeah. What program would you recommend to create such a personalized CV?
So I did mine on Photoshop. But there's a free version of a software like Photoshop, which is a browser-based one that's not actually Canva, although I saw that one. That one's also good, but it's called Photopea. I'll put it in the chat. I've got it open now. It's basically Photoshop. Like, it's literally the same as Photoshop, but it's free, and I use that. And if you don't know how to use it, again, there are so many videos on YouTube teaching you how to do these things. I can't recommend it enough. Like, if you don't know how to do creative-based softwares, YouTube is your best friend. It taught me how to use Adobe, like, so well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I use that, like, on a day-to-day basis in my job. I feel like maybe people don't realize you can still use it while you're in industry as well to, like, pick up those skills.
Yeah, absolutely. I do that all the time. Continually trying to make myself better at different things with good old YouTube.
Yeah.
I saw a question there about CVs being useful to personalize for indie studios. Would you say this is also the same when applying for AAA studios? What I would say is, for AAA studios, how many people do you think are applying for each of those roles? Because I know it's a lot. One of my good friends has just gone for a couple of roles in some very big studios, and there were hundreds and hundreds of applicants. So you need to do something to stand out from that crowd, whether that is writing the best ever personal profile you've ever seen, or making your CV colourful to make them look at it in the first place. You have to find what is your thing that you can focus in on to make it personal and make it stand out. But I think it is still important, because otherwise you are just one of 100. So, yeah.
That's great. Do you have any disabled groups that you can link to that you mentioned earlier? As I saw, there's one comment that relates to you quite a bit, and they've asked specifically for any groups that you have on
I
hand.
see your comment. I don't have them on my saved tab, so I'll have to go in and get them all. But I will put them in this chat if that's okay, in the live panel chat.
Maybe after the panel.
Yeah. I'll find
Awesome.
those for you. Because it's really useful to know other people.
For sure. Yeah. There's a few questions about transferable skills. Are there any sort of surprising ones that you found going from being a teacher to doing community management that you wouldn't have expected to be applicable?
One funny one, I think, was behavior management, because until I started working in community management, I didn't realize how much you needed behavior management. And I have a very particular brand of behavior management where I have the mantra of fighting fire with water, not fire. Too often, teachers will be just as aggressive back at a student if a student is being aggressive, but that just escalates the situation. I'm the type of person that wants to find the reason why somebody is behaving a certain way instead of addressing the behavior itself. And that really helped me with community management, because when someone was causing issues, but they were a key member of the community, for example, I was able to talk to them and find out what was causing them to act this way and address that rather than just banning them straight away. So yeah, that was definitely something that was very much more useful than I thought it would be.
Absolutely, that sounds really good. Such a good way of handling conflict as well, instead of escalating stuff, trying to figure out why there's an issue in the first place. Yeah, for sure. Do you think with transferable skills, coming from a very specialized background, can limit the transferable skills you have?
I mean, so it depends obviously what you've been doing, right? But there are going to be skills that you have. So say, I don't know, you're a scientist, right? And you're working on filters for airplanes, right? You've still been a scientist on a team. You've still maybe had leadership positions in that team. You've still had to think creatively and problem solve. You've still had to be able to think on your feet. So all of those skills right there from a scientist are also really useful really useful skills in community management, right? So I think there is a way to look at it. Well, I've screwed myself over by being too specific. But actually, if you have that viewpoint when you're looking at it, you've closed yourself off straight away. What you need to do is go, okay, what can I do? And I think when you start looking at the cans rather than the cannots, you might be surprised by just how many skills you have that will meet something in the industry. Because like I said, there are so many different roles. It blew me away when I found all the different types of positions available, that there are roles you will be able to do. That's how what I've seen from other people going into the industry from different backgrounds too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good metaphor for it, I think. Yeah. In terms of approaching networking and making connections with people in the games industry during the pandemic specifically as well, how did you go about that? Because that seems like it was even harder than what it would normally be. Yeah.
Funnily enough, for me, it was easier because during that time, my disability was so bad that I was basically bedbound. So I had my computer at the end of my bed and I did it all from there. I went to every single online event that I could see going on. Things like the CMX community specific events, things like the talks here. There are so many different events on in so many different areas all the time, even things that are just like lunch hours for devs, where devs just on lunch once a week, we'll all get into a Discord chat together and have a laugh, get to know each other, talk about what's going on and that they're allowed to talk about outside of NDAs and things like that. I think people, unless you're looking for it, might not know how many different online events there are, but there are so many, and a lot of them have specific chat setups in between panels for networking because it's so important in the industry, and especially during the pandemic, and it's continued quite a lot actually now, even when people are mostly back to being out and about. There are still loads of events on, and I just love it because I'm not able to go to a lot of physical events, so I'm able to meet people from all over the world, from all different sorts of development studios, from my bed. And it's brilliant. And I've made some great friends that way too.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm so glad it's become a lot more accessible for a lot of people, especially like there's so many people that couldn't have gone, you know, either like they're anxious about it or money issues or disabilities, you know? Yeah. So it's just so good that there's always something going on, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely, there really is. And most events now, if they are in person, are also having online versions. Whether even if it's just a stream of what's going on, other devs that can't be there will be in the chat and you can talk to them and network there. Like, it's about making the most of the opportunities that are there and going for it.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so we're coming close to time, but we have one more question. Ooh.
Okay.
Oh, no, we don't. That was just a thank you. I think someone else is typing though, so I'm going to hold on just a little bit.
Yeah, no worries. I'm not in a rush. It's fine. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Being online really gave disabled people a chance. I think the pandemic, awful, horrible thing. But if it's done one thing, it has made this industry more accessible to disabled people. Massively so. And I mean that's a whole different talk, right? Like, I could do a whole talk about accessibility in the industry. And what it's like. Yeah. And what it's like as a disabled person trying to work in the industry. But yeah. It's hard, but it's doable. It is doable. And you can get there. Like, if I can get there, you can get there. That's what I basically am here to say. If I can do it, so can you. I really do believe that. I've had
do you have any final last words of inspiration or like anything people can do right now to try and change
utilize this server? Utilize this server. Like, I truly mean that. Like, everything that the people in this server put on for you is so useful. Like, if I hadn't found this server and gone to all the talks, I wouldn't have learned half the things that I needed to know to get into this industry. My CV would still be black and white in boxes, looking ugly, not demonstrating all the things I can do in community management. I definitely would not have a job in the industry if it wasn't for this server. So utilize it, and other servers like it. It's so important to use what you have. But yeah, that's my takeaway.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your time.
No, thank you guys. And thanks for listening, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Okay, bye everyone. Thank you.